bit of a sparse crew if you are, of course, invited to move up. If you're happy where you are, by all means, don't let us interrupt you. But if you would want to move up, please do.
Turning.
Yes.
I am Lindsay-Rae McIntyre. I am the Chief Diversity Officer and Corporate Vice President of Talent Development for Microsoft. And I'm so excited that you all have taken the opportunity to join us today for what I think is going to be a pretty cool conversation about inclusion and accessibility in tech. It happens to be the case that we've learned some stuff along the way. So I've brought with me a ton of experts who will share their perspective and also maybe give a peek into what we think is coming. So as I said, I'm Lindsay-Rae, pronouns she, her, and I'm going to let my esteemed panelists introduce themselves before we jump in.
Hello, everyone. My name is Katy Jo Wright, and I pronoun she, her, and I am the head of Gaming for Everyone and Sustainability within Xbox. And so that is all about how do we intentionally make gaming as inclusive as possible and fun for everyone for generations to come, which means as sustainable as possible.
Awesome. Hi, I'm Naa Adoley Azu, pronouns she, her. I lead the Inclusive Research Initiative within our Experiences and Devices division. And my main focus is to make sure that we're incorporating insights from historically excluded people into our product decision making so that whatever we create really does empower everyone on the planet.
Very good. My name is Tara Roth. I'm a Corporate Vice President for the Microsoft 365 team that's called Customer Success Engineering. And I'm also pronouns she, her, and so I'd say let's dive in.
Awesome, thanks, Tara. Before we get into sort of the individual expertise places, it's often the case that people want to ask, like, how did you come to doing this work? You all have had very sort of textured and incredible careers. What brought you to the intersection of technology, inclusive design, and accessibility? Katie, maybe you start.
Sure. So for me, it really started in my early days at Microsoft. So I've been at the company nearly 25 years now. And in the early days, the head of diversity and inclusion at the time, his name was Santiago Rodriguez. And I just heard him speaking, and the way that he talked about the impact of diversity on the business and what diversity meant, it just really captured me. And so I think even though I say that I'm in my fourth career in Xbox, just all happens to be at Microsoft, I've figured out ways, and it's been a part of every role because of the way that he described what diversity and inclusion really, how it showed up in the products. And that's what we're here for, is to create products for the world. We really need a diverse perspective around the table, and that can show up in many, many different ways. And so I think the breadth of diversity and inclusion, that's really what has attracted me and incorporated it into almost every role I've had within Microsoft.
Fun fact, Katy Jo used to work on the diversity and inclusion team.
Fun
Long
fact.
time ago. Yes. All right, Adelaide.
Yes, and so I'm a lawyer, right? And so justice, fairness, equity have always been important to me. But I think joining the Indiana Civil Rights Commission in 2018 is what really pivoted me into product inclusion. Because in that role, I was settling discrimination claims that had been filed by people who had either used a product or tried to access a service or an experience and had felt discriminated against or had experienced a disparate outcome. Settling those claims required, yes, the financial award, but the agency's focus was really on affirmative reliefs, introducing those policies, those practices, those changes to make sure that the incident did not recur. And that meant, from a product perspective, sometimes retrofitting. It's really expensive, it's time-consuming, it's clunky, sometimes it doesn't even work well. And so after doing that for 3 years, right, the question was, why am I at the end of the process where the harm has already been done or the exclusion has already been experienced, right? I want to be at the beginning, at the ideation stage where the design is being created, when people are testing, so that we can be intentional about building in that inclusion from the very beginning. It's not a bolt-on. We want to do it from the very beginning to create those products that are more valuable and usable, to everyone. So that's what brought me here.
Great. Well, for me, really got interested in technology when I was in middle school, high school, when I saw my parents' small business just completely transform, because it was an all paper-based business at the time in a small rural community. And we had neighbors who were college professors, and they just took a computer and completely transformed the way that that business operated. That got me interested in tech, so I came to Microsoft just over 30 years ago. And I remember fondly too, when Satya became CEO about 10 years ago, how much of a focus he placed on culture and inclusion, and that has just driven me to even want to do more in that space. I remember him pushing us very hard on accessibility to do more, and also launching programs like the AI for Cultural Heritage program. So it's just been a privilege to see him lean in, and so that's compelled me to want to lean in more.
That's awesome. So Tara, since you just sort of had the mic, I'm going to stay with you for just a second and sort of launch us into sort of some deep dives on expertise that our panelists have. And you've really been foundational in sort of the technical architecture and evolution of Microsoft's products. I'd love for you to sort of ground us in the relationship between sort of tech inclusion and accessibility.
I think back for many, many years, I think we've had a focus, at least on the Microsoft 365 side of the business, on accessibility. And I think it's driven us to build much better products as a result for a broader base of our customers. And when I took on a role recently, I'm now the diversity and inclusion sponsor for our division. I also wanted to add in a new program, we call it Inclusive Product Accelerator. But the idea was I wanted to focus on creating features in our product that would help even more. And so we broadened our perspective around the type of features that we're building to include even more of our consumers and our customers around the world. So that's been a fun journey.
Yeah, and as the Chief Diversity Officer, I sort of camp out in sort of the HR function. And yet if you told me 20 years ago that I would be spending a ton of time in like all the gorgeous nerdiness of engineering land working on employee and customer experiences around identity and feature and functionality, I would have been like, no chance. And yet here we are.
And here we are. We come to you for advice on features we're building.
And here we are. So, Tara, you've watched the evolution of Teams and Office and the elements of accessibility that live in there. I'd love for you to share some developments in the portfolio and highlight mechanisms and strategies for how we think about both speed and scale, which don't always coincide with inclusive design. Sometimes that takes some time and some patience, and the teams learned a lot about speed and scale around inclusive design.
Yeah. Well, let's start. I thought it would be fun to just share a couple of examples. When I talk about the Inclusive Product Accelerator program, a few examples that rose out of that program that we have shipped or we're shipping soon in our M365 product experiences. So the first one you'll see on the top left, we had a lot of our employees and our customers saying, hey, you keep misspelling my name. You're marking it with the little red squiggly. And so there was a lot of passion around, we worked with a Canadian organization to really help us get into a better position so we weren't miscorrectly marking something as misspelled. And in the top right, you see the concept of having transcription work well in Microsoft Teams and being able to recognize multiple languages. And hopefully you saw some of the demos earlier today too. Just these bilingual community of our users is such an important one that we're trying to serve well. And then the bottom left here, you see the pointer indicator. This one's coming soon, but this is the idea for somebody who has a harder time tracking their mouse. It brings more of a visual indicator as to where your mouse is located on the screen. And then similarly in Excel, we're working on a similar type of concept where you can see highlighted the focus of the cell that you're trying to work on. So these are just a few of examples, and I really love how this program has really ignited the enthusiasm with our employees to really look at ways that we can serve underrepresented groups better within the product experiences that we're building. So I'm just very excited that this program we've now had it 2 years, and so I've just been really excited to have it roll out.
Yeah, it was cool to see in Satya's keynote this morning. I was sharing with the team, sometimes when you live in this stuff and then you see it on the screen, it feels even remarkable then. I was like, Copilot just flipped languages like instantaneously. It was really cool. and then just the leadership and innovation of Jenny-Leigh Fleury at Microsoft, who's the Chief Accessibility Officer, and just the tremendous amount of work that's been done in AI so far, including some of these features for the disability community in particular, is both energizing and I think all of us would say overwhelming, because we know that we're just getting started. We're not even close to sort of finished, but cool innovations. So Adoley, when you spoke about what brought you into research, I loved how you said that you wanted to get to the front of the funnel as opposed to being at the end. Yes. And you spent a lot of time thinking about how do we invest, what do customers want? And yet I have to imagine there's a lot of signal and noise. It's a pretty busy space. How do you think about curating signals to be able to provide advice and research-backed recommendations for products?
Yeah, so I think it's really important for us to start thinking about this from the point of hearing from our customers, right? Because I always say that research really informs design. And so systematically and intentionally gathering that feedback from various sources, not one source, but multiple sources, and looking for those common themes, those opportunities that we can use to rectify any barriers that are in the way of our users, that's really important. And once you have access to that data, you need to analyze it. You need to prioritize those insights from the customers, right? Because as developers, yes, we have our own ideas around what we want to create. But the question is, what do our users want? And how are they experiencing what we've created? What are we excluding? And so through that process, it's really critical to look at the best practices that we're gathering, looking at developing with inclusive design in mind, creating those inclusive features, the content, and giving people options. Like, options are really inclusive. If you think about the smart screen, that we love it, and we can use it, but what about people who have mobility, difficulties, right? So you want to still have the knobs even when you have the smart screen, so that it's inclusive and a lot of people can use it. And promoting inclusive research practices is really the way to make this happen. Cross-collaborating and keeping ourselves centered on the concept of product inclusion. Every point along the way of the product development process, we want to center our customers and hear from them and input their insights into developing amazing products for their use.
I appreciated in the intro when you said that it can't be a bolt-on because it's really expensive to fix it after the fact.
Yes, extremely.
And I think that those of us who've been doing this for a super long time have lots of stories on the ways in which we figured that out the hard way and have now figured out a different way by not only listening but creating scalable ways for best practices. So Katy Jo, I'm gonna move to you, but before we jump into the question for Katy Jo, we've got a video that we wanna share with you all first.
At Xbox, our mission is to deliver the joy and community of gaming to everyone on the planet. From gamers young and old, to developers big and small, to parents and guardians, and all the 3 billion gamers we have yet to reach. Since the creation of Gaming for Everyone in 2015, we've been on a journey to help our teams have the tools, knowledge, and practices to make more inclusive products to meet the needs of those 3 billion gamers. So how do we get from where we are today to be the industry we want to be tomorrow? We do this through product inclusion. At Xbox, we define product inclusion as the intentional practice of designing and developing games and products that are meaningful to a broad range of users. Products are games and consoles, of course, but product is also how you contribute to the customer experience across various gaming ecosystems. This could be developer tools, platform settings, community engagement, or marketing campaigns. Every single person in our industry plays a role in product inclusion. And if we don't intentionally include, we unintentionally exclude. In the same way that we think of gaming as a doorway to another world, we can think of product inclusion as the many doorways that exist in a player's experience. Sometimes these doors are open and inviting, and sometimes they're closed, even if we don't intend them to be. we're intentionally focusing our efforts to create a product inclusion framework and deliver product inclusion, or the opening or closing of a door, in 4 key areas, which we call the inclusive growth doorways. They are approachability, representation, globalization, and accessibility. Our inclusive growth doorways help us be intentional with our designs to bring the joy and community of gaming to everyone on the planet. And since all creators strive to reach more players and drive more engagement, we each have an opportunity to open doors and deliver growth in our own ways. Check out our product inclusion framework resources on Microsoft Game Dev at aka.ms/product inclusion to see tangible examples, best practices, and more in each of our inclusive growth doorways. So, what door will you open today?
I love that invitation. And I like gaming is just so cool. So Katy Jo, I'd love for you to share a little bit about the journey of Gaming for Everyone, how it evolved, and the framework that you're using to create common language to accelerate progress.
Absolutely. So Gaming for Everyone, as it said in the video, started in 2015. And just from here on out, I'm going to call it G4E because, you know, we're at Microsoft, we talk in acronyms. So Gaming for Everyone's too long. So G4E. But it really started out of a business need to expand our player reach. And it talked about 3 billion gamers in that video. And at the time, with our #1 business goal being how do we acquire more users? And at the time, the number that we were targeting was more than people who were playing on Xbox, PlayStation, and Nintendo all combined. So we knew we had to do something different. And we knew we had to be intentional with creating gaming experiences that were going to appeal to a broader range of gamers in a meaningful way so that they came back and stayed within the ecosystem. And so in the early days of Gaming for Everyone, we saw a lot of teams kind of expand their player reach and apply some of the G4E concepts in their own ways with things like the Xbox Adaptive Controller, which launched in 2018 and really enabled players with mobility impairments to play in a more meaningful way for them. Or from a content perspective, a brand new game called 𝗬𝗲𝗂𝗑𝗫, well, brand new in 2018 when it launched, to be clear. But this was the team that took from the beginning very intentional decision-making and looking at the behaviors that resulted out of the player mechanics that they were designing in the game to create an inclusive and welcoming community within their game. So we were seeing some early signs and early successes, but they were more ad hoc and one-off, and we weren't really seeing it scale and build momentum at scale across Team Xbox. Another thing we noticed in the early days is it kind of tended to be passion-driven versus directly tied to business outcomes. And so with this framework of the inclusive growth doorways, that really established a shared language, a shared focus, and a common skill set that we needed to build across Team Xbox so that we could deliver these more inclusive gaming experiences. But what we found was this framework and this shared language and shared focus really turned into funneling that passion that people had across the organization directly into business outcomes. So we have really seen this shared language as a catalyst to building momentum across Team Xbox and people delivering product inclusion in their own way and in whatever that means for their part of the business.
I love that. When I first joined Microsoft and started to pay attention to the Xbox experience and just the sort of the deep commitment that there is to sort of empathizing with the gaming experience, it was perhaps the first time for me that I understood this phrase that I'd heard in the tech of, our devices and our experiences are really an extension of who we are. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, I then learned that this same sort of product inclusion mindset permeated all of our tech. But it was the gaming examples, probably because I have small kids who are, playing with the technology, that had me sort of really click in to watch just the intentionality of how we're getting curious and also responding with some pretty remarkable speed to the feedback that we're getting. So Tara, I'd love to sort of jump back to you. Before I ask Tara my next question, just know that we will be taking questions. There's an online experience, so for those of you who have joined us digitally, thank you and welcome. We hope that you'll jump in the chat and ask questions, and any of you in the room, of course, you can ask questions in the chat as well. So just know that after I'm finished my formal questions with our speakers, I'm happy to take any questions that you all have as well. So Tara, when you think about what you've learned about inclusive design and sort of the customer base that we keep talking about, Microsoft's almost 50. Like, we're almost an adult now relative to the journey we've been on, and we've learned a lot. But the customers and the stakeholders and the shareholders that have sort of wants and needs from all of our stuff are pretty varied. How do you think about how do you think about accommodating for that wide variety of customers?
Yeah, it is a challenge when you think about the millions and millions of end users that are trying to utilize the technology that we build. And I like to think about it this way, which is you really can start designing for one and then spread to many. And there are a lot of times that we start the development of a feature with a particular user group in mind, and then over time it just gets picked up in other ways and other scenarios that are also very useful. So an example of that would be like the dictate feature. You can imagine we designed that, somebody who is maybe hard of hearing, and you want to be able to, sorry, they can't type, they don't have the ability to type, so you want to be able to use your voice to input into the product experience. And that feature over time also becomes very useful for other things now, in addition to those who have the challenge of not being able to use the keyboard as input. So it's really designing for that initial scenario, but knowing that it will scale to many, many users for other purposes is one way that we try and scale the work that we do.
Yeah, and I think even sort of the lesson learned of, to your point, like taking a use case that is perhaps narrow in its original design that then becomes so expansive that allows all of us to benefit. Yeah. I use the dictate feature when I'm across the room and doing other things.
Yes, and you need to
need to say a thing and record some stuff, and and yet that example isn't the example that it was designed for, and yet it ends up having multiple.
Another for me, like I'm walking out of a meeting and I need to quickly respond to an email. Often faster to do that on my phone with voice than it is to go sit down at a computer with a keyboard. So it expands to many once you've got that use case designed and built.
Yeah. As you say that, like I've actually watched Tara do this. Like we were in a meeting and somebody had feedback, and like Tara like whips out her phone and she's talking and like dictating into her phone so that she can recall the bug or the experience that somebody's having to relay it to the engineering team. When you did that for the first time, I was like, that is so cool. I need to do that more. So I appreciated that.
You bet. Well, Lindsay-Rae, can we turn the table a little bit here and ask you a question?
Sure.
So this is obviously an awesome time to be in tech. There's so much happening. I think it's just such an amazing transformational moment. And I'm curious to know how you're thinking about it from the role that you are leading from in terms of diversity inclusion and also from a talent perspective.
Yeah, I mean, it is a really remarkable time. We are the most diverse Microsoft we've ever been, right? We are about 220,000 employees in 190 countries around the world. And that is a pretty awesome community to sort of think about from a talent development standpoint. And so not only thinking about how is it that we're going to continue to invite people to tech and to Microsoft, maybe who haven't considered tech before. And so I think the teams have been really innovative over the last decade in particular of inviting people into tech who maybe otherwise wouldn't have found their way to tech. But then sort of once people are at Microsoft or in the tech industry, making sure that we are thoughtful and transparent about how to wayfind, how to get mentors and sponsors you need, how to get clarity on the skills that you have and the skills that you need to be able to grow and advance in your career. What are the opportunities and adjacent career paths that maybe you don't know about? And so, for me, I happen to be, a nerd in both of the disciplines that I have responsibility for now, and yet, to your point of making sure that, for individuals who haven't always been able to look up in the hierarchy and see people who look like them, or to know what's possible for them if they're, sitting in a country working for an American headquartered company, we have the responsibility to help people unlock just really remarkable, robust careers, particularly with hybrid, particularly with the tools and technology that exist today, as we try and unlock this really ridiculously huge, amazing mission that we have at Microsoft. Because we do take very seriously the ambition to empower every person and every organization, which is 50% overwhelming and 50% energizing in the same moment. But I think for me, it is really about making sure that individuals and managers and leaders and mentors and sponsors have the actual information they need so that we can keep people in tech and thriving in tech along the way.
Awesome. Thank you.
Adoley, when you think about Microsoft's announcements and developments around advancing inclusive tech in the era of AI, some new accessibility skills for Copilot and Windows accessibility assistants have been announced. How do you think of AI as an accelerator in the space, and how does research drive us forward?
Yes, so that's a really interesting question. We've heard both Satya and also Alesh talk about, adopting this whole concept of shifting left, and Copilot, which is our AI, is really a prime example of how we're leading in that way. We took that opportunity to build accessibility and inclusion into Copilot from the very beginning. And research is driving this by ensuring that we're engaging very actively with historically excluded groups, right? And gathering and leveraging those insights so that we can create products that are innovative and also valuable. Now, when I talk about historically excluded groups, I think it's always important to share a little bit more about what that means. So we know about race, we know about disability status, but think about frontline workers. Think about people in deskless or service jobs. Think about people who are mobile dependent, right? Think about people who use older devices that don't have amazing bandwidth or internet access, limited print literacy, blind or low vision people. And just imagine how Copilot can eliminate their frustrations at work. And so accessibility in Copilot is really great, right? And we've recently had a study with the neurodiverse community within Microsoft, and they shared with us how meaningful and valuable Copilot is for them when it comes to generating content and eliminating what they called blank page syndrome, or just those task initiation barriers that make it difficult for us to be our best or be our productive best. Copilot is available in multiple languages right now, so that you don't have to be an English speaker to be able to use it. The summarization features within Copilot, there's so many things that we're doing right now with AI, and enabling the AI to also empower us to do more, so that desire to make sure that our products are inclusive and are usable across the world really comes through. And so inclusive research is really leading the way in that space, making sure that we are engaging and we are making the changes and removing the barriers and creating inclusively for everyone.
Thank you for that. I love those examples. And as I connect with the research team, I just continue to be really inspired by the sort of the persistent impatience around diverse data sets, right? I think many, many years ago, we were ingesting data and realized that we needed more robust, diverse data sets. And so the research team has been really sort of advocating for and pushing on diverse data sets for a long time that has allowed us to unlock both unique partnerships as well as unique research. So I love those examples. Katy Jo, the video that you shared talked about all of the folks who are perhaps not yet gamers, and the world is a very big place. We'd love to bring gaming to everybody. How is it that you think about inclusion as a driver of business growth, and how that might translate into future game development?
Yeah, well, it's funny, I get asked this question quite a bit because internally people can be like, yeah, everyone feels good. And I'm like, okay, awesome. Awesome that people feel good. But at the end of the day, this is about business, right? And we have to drive and be intentional about that business growth. And so very similar to AI, I see inclusive design as something that is gonna be a non-negotiable in business moving forward if you want your business to remain relevant over time and continue to grow, especially with younger generations, right? And so it's kind of the how do we get that both and part of it. And so when we think about it and how have we seen direct business impact because of intentionality with bringing an inclusive lens to the work, I'll give you 3 examples real quick around, since we've already kind of talked about accessibility, we talk about the 4 doorways all the time. It's our shared language, it grounds us. So I'll give an example from the other 3 doorways. So the first one is representation. And I'll give it from the game Forza Horizon 5. And with this, we just recently saw data from industry data point where 71% of players say that having diverse characters and or diverse content is they rated it either very or highly important to them when purchasing a game. And so that is significant data point coming from our players. And so with Forza Horizon 5, they really took that to heart and brought that to life through character customization features, kind of what Adelaide was talking about earlier, the importance of customization, where they have added features around this time being able to customize around skin tone and hair types and race and ethnicity and even pronouns that carry all the way through the game. And so the feedback that we've received from players is that really helped them feel like they belong in that game. And when they feel like they belong, they play more, right? Which helps drive the business. And so the second example from a globalization doorway, I'm gonna stick with Forza Horizon 5 because it is an awesome game. If any of you are even halfway gamers out there, highly recommend it. But with Forza Horizon 5, for those who might not be familiar with the Forza Horizon franchise, is they pick a new location around the world with each edition. And edition 5 was based in Mexico. That was the location they chose. And the team did a really good job at connecting with local experts, where they invested a lot of time in bringing the details of the game to really make it a true-to-life representation of Mexico, both from around the scenery that you saw, but also different cultural cues throughout the game. And so we did see increased engagement from those within Mexico, which we typically see an increased engagement from the host country. But we also saw with Forza Horizon 5 increased engagement across other Latin American countries, which was new. So that intentionality to really bring in a global perspective really helped contribute to the business outcomes of that title. And so the third one I'll call out is from an approachability doorway. And this is one I know everyone can relate to, and where we focus a lot on our top of funnel, right? And where are potential users churning? And so that evaluation, where you're talking about from a data set perspective, looking at user churn in itself can be an intentionally inclusive experience and conversation if you take the time to look at the demographics of who's churning and understanding why. And so within gaming, an example of how we've really looked at this and brought it to life is where a lot of our big studios or big titles have a big online gaming presence. And it's important to us to make sure that we have a welcoming and safe community for anyone who wants to game online. And so there was a lot of investments made around how do we reduce disruptive behaviors through our different communication scenarios. And once we continued with that investment to reduce those disruptive behaviors, we saw a decrease in churn, which then we know leads also to an increase in revenue for those titles. So by focusing on creating a welcoming and safe environment, it has absolutely shown business outcomes. And so by opening all three of these doorways, representation, globalization, and approachability, we have directly contributed to the business growth across that with the intentionality of opening those doors for more players.
Those were amazing examples.
I could go on all day.
Thank you for all of those. I will also say, as I spend time with our LGBTQI+ community inside Microsoft, the intentionality, to your point on having representation in the game developers, having representation in the the Microsoft gaming squad, to then manifested and in how we curate the experience. Sort of again, reiterates your point of when I can see myself in the experience that the game is creating for me, with me, the more I want to stay. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So you all have spoken sort of individually to something that I think feels like perhaps an obvious thing, but something that we need to always remember to spend time on, and that is listening. Listening to customers, listening to data, looking at the qualitative, looking at the quantitative, thinking about, communities or stakeholders or who are interacting with our technology. Tara, you illuminated sort of the broad array of perspectives that we have to consider at any given point in time for a Microsoft product. And I'd just love for each of you to maybe share some tips or tricks on how you think about or go about actively listening in service of improving the technical experience you're creating. So Tara, I'll start with you.
All right. Well, I think really there's a lot of different listening signals that we have, but I'll generalize them into our Microsoft employees. So we've got a lot of focus on our employee resource groups and really trying to bring their voice into the product design. And then also from a customer listening perspective, one of the responsibilities in my team is to build the feedback capability within M365. So if you've seen the thumbs up or thumbs down, or if you go to the help menu and click on feedback, that's a feature that we build with a very big intention of we want to hear from the end users what their experiences are so that we can go and improve the experiences for our customers. So those two kind of both internal and external lenses are hugely important to us. And you've talked a lot about some of the Copilot feedback we've already been getting, but especially for Copilot, as fast as this is moving, we've really been honing in our listening system for Copilot in particular to make sure that we're learning and moving quickly.
Do you all use the thumbs up, thumbs down?
Please do.
Now you need to.
Awesome.
With the thumbs up.
Tara's counting. Tara's counting on you.
And not just, and I'll just say not just counting, but the text you type then really helps us understand more flavor to the type of, it's not just simply a thumbs up or thumbs down. It's a give us the why behind the thumbs up and thumbs down really helps us. Yeah. So thank you for that gift of feedback.
Adoley.
Yes, and I think similar to what Tara said, we are really interested in making sure that we're hearing from internal folks and also externally, right? So, there are internal surveys, there are feedback sessions with our own ERGs. We have Blacks at Microsoft, Disability at Microsoft, partnering really closely with the Inclusive Products Accelerator to hear from them, right, and make sure that their concerns, their barriers, and their challenges are being incorporated into what we're creating. And then, of course, we have Compass Connect, which is our own, our powerful customer base. We love engaging with them and just gathering all of that feedback and incorporating it into what we're doing. And from a gathering perspective, I think it's really important to say that you need to know from space to space who your historically excluded people are, right? So what we use to screen in, let's say for the US, is not going to be applicable for maybe Latin America or for Australia or for India or China. And so for the Inclusive Research Initiative, one of our roles or one of the core responsibilities that we've taken upon ourselves is to create those tools and resources to make it possible for people to work within those spaces that we want them to engage. Create a screener that works in the US, create a screener that works in India or China or in Latin America, so that when we enter those spaces, we're able to hear, those voices.
Katy Jo.
So I would say, yep, we've got internal and external listening systems, but within gaming, kind of the phrase that you will hear throughout the halls always, and halls can be virtual or in real life, but halls is we keep the player at the center of everything we do. And in order to keep the player at the center of everything we do, we have to listen and talk to the players quite often. And so we've got internal mechanisms that are available to anyone, but the important thing on our internal piece is that it's with employees that have a broad range of lived experiences so that our own teams can bring them an idea at any point in the process. So it doesn't have to be code that we're willing to ship out, under NDA or to a certain point where we're ready to check it in. But even with an early idea of like, hey, as a team, we're thinking about going this way or that way. From an internal perspective, we can get that feedback and share it with a group of that broad range of lived experiences. And then on the player side, we have the Xbox ambassadors, where we have an ongoing dialogue. But I think that's something really important, especially within gaming, because we do have relationship with our fans and with our players. And so for us, what we have seen has been a big differentiator for the people who have engaged in our listening systems is how we close the loop with them. And so how, once people give us feedback, what did we hear, playing back to them, what did we hear, you tell us, and then what have we done because of it? And especially if an idea that they gave us shows up in a game, we want to come back and tell them and celebrate with them. And so even if it's at a scale, because we know one-on-one isn't always doable, right? So I got reality goggles on. But it's how do we close that feedback loop and let people know? And that what we have seen as we started to do that more and more, even at scale, we've really seen the dialogue continue and people willing to give that really rich feedback that does help us learn, help us expand our awareness of the way that people are playing the games and the way people want to play games and what gaming means to them. Because people around the world, gaming means a lot of different things to people. So we have a big opportunity to deliver on that if we keep the player at the center of everything we do, and listening is a must-do on that.
Yeah, and I think about sort of even the part of the work that I do, sort of the, having an acute ability to indicate to all employees, leaders, managers, customers, researchers, players, we hear you, we see you, we value you, you matter, your experiences matter, and we're working hard to try and make them even better, is sort of an ethos of engineering that I really appreciate at Microsoft. Adoley, last question to you before we take a couple of audience questions. I'd just love your sort of key takeaways that you'd love to leave the audience with based on sort of the range of your experience and perspective.
And so I think for product makers or product developers, right, making sure that what we're creating is equitable, usable, valuable, requires a really deep understanding of our users' needs and their preferences. And Microsoft has been at the forefront of advancing inclusive experiences in tech, even more so in this current era of AI. But that means engaging very closely. That means co-creating and collaborating across platforms. Intentionality, right, as both Tara and Katy Jo have mentioned, is really important. Being intentional about creating for those scenarios that are not what we would call default scenarios, right? The mobile experience, making sure that we're creating for low bandwidth, making sure that we're creating for offline, making sure that we're creating experiences in multiple languages. And Copilot is really, right, leading the forefront there. Making sure that the design experience itself, right, from ideation all through the process, there's testing to make sure that our users continue to be the center of our focus. That is, I think, the biggest takeaway, being customer-driven and making sure that we have representation, right, in the teams that are creating, as well as in the insights that we're feeding into the products. We should always be open to learning, right? Because that is an opportunity for growth. And the only way to learn is to continue to interact with people, to understand the experiences, so that what we create really empowers them to do more.
I love that. Thank you. Okay, so now we get to take questions from any of you. Natalie's going to help us.
Okay, so we're going to take a question that came into the session chat, and it's a bit of a follow-up. So the question is adding inclusive features necessarily a burdensome thing, or have those on the panel learned how to add inclusive features and priorities into frameworks that adjust the scope of the work without necessarily increasing the workload?
Great question. Tara, do you want to start?
Yeah, so there's in the engineering team, we maintain what we call a backlog. And so typically what happens is this idea will get bubbled up and then it will get weighed against everything else that we have going in the organization. And so it definitely, it's a work of prioritization, but I wouldn't say that it means that we just ask everybody to work harder in order to be able to do this. It is fitting into the prioritization and then leaning a lot on this is the real business outcome if we go do this work and how we can expand our customer base as a result. So oftentimes it's making sure that people understand the context and have that perspective versus feeling like, oh, this is not something I can fit in, but really broadening their perspective on the business impact and the positive that can bring from that angle.
Yeah, there is that phrase sort of go slow to go fast, to Katy Jo's point and Adelai's point. Like if you don't think about it, and then you get all the way through the other side only to figure out that there's a super profitable customer set you haven't thought about yet, then you got to go backwards, right? And that's arguably harder and more expensive than doing it the first time. Anything that either of you would add?
Yes, and so I think for us, the whole concept is to incorporate it into the process from the very beginning, from ideation stage, right? So that it is not something we're adding on, right, or bolting on after the product has been created. And that is really all this concept of shifting left, right, so that we've built it in, and then it doesn't become extra work. And we're really focused on delivering that. Yeah.
Do you want to add anything?
I could talk about this one for an hour in and of itself. But I think, you know, a lot of that is, it comes down to prioritization and what you want to do and the kind of experience you want to create. So when we're talking with different teams, making it not an either or. It's thinking about that end player experience or user, right? We say player obviously in gaming, but end user experience, and what kind of experience do you want to create? And who do you want to create it for? And if you myopically think one way, you're going to inherently limit your product.
Yes.
Like hard stop. And so to me, it's first off shifting the mindset where it's an either or, like I'm gonna build this product and inclusive features. It's shifting that where it is part of the core product and it's really getting to that end user experience and keeping that at this, you know, not to use our phrase, but it's a popular phrase across gaming because it's legit, of keeping that player at the center of everything we do and really designing for them. And it does become part of a prioritization, and that's the reality, but really shifting the mindset of how you go into that prioritization discussion. And so it's kind of like what you were saying of really expanding what we think and how we approach that.
That's awesome. Well, we are out of time, unfortunately. And so, you know, I hope a little bit of what you got a taste of today was how we at Microsoft think about the commitment to diversity and inclusion and Microsoft's mission, not only in the experience and the culture that we are unlocking inside Microsoft, but the way in which that commitment and tenacity is built into the totality of all that we do at Microsoft, from the engineering to the experiences to the research. And I hope in partnership with many of you, you all work for organizations that are close partners and customers of Microsoft. And so whether you're sort of helping us by giving us feedback, or you're helping us through you know, more connected partnerships, we truly are grateful and really appreciate you and all in the room joining us, you all online joining us, and to my esteemed panelists, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And I noticed some hands up. I think a few of us will stick around if you wanted to approach us for any questions.
In the back, by all means, come up and chat before they transition us to the next session.
All right.
Have a great build, everyone.
You too.